Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. And I will invite our speakers to turn on their cameras and join me as well. I'm Sarah Abrevaya Stein, professor of history at UCLA and the Sadie and Ludwig Kahn director of the L&D Leve Center for Jewish Studies. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar entitled A Memoir of Holocaust Survival in Belgium and a Spotlight on Undergraduate Research. And I have some words of opening before we begin our presentation. This is an unusual event for us. It is both a book celebration and a celebration of collaboration and undergraduate research. It's my pleasure to thank the staff who enabled us to pull off this event, especially Chelsea White and David Wu, Vivian Hollenbeck, to thank our co-sponsoring unit, the Stanford University's Leve Center of Jewish Studies, UCLA's History Department. And I would like to note that the book that we are celebrating is available under the title With Many Miracles, A Memoir of Holocaust Survival in Belgium, is available for sale on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and we will put the link into the Q&A or chat feature for you to see shortly. So this is an unusual event in a number of respects, but one of the ways it's unusual is that it brings together a wonderful group of collaborators. And I would like to start by acknowledging and introducing the people you will hear from today. And then we will proceed with our program. Joining me on today's webinar is my colleague, Professor Janine Zacharia from Stanford University, Ken Cappell, the son of Israel Cappell, who was instrumental with the collaboration of his family in allowing us to assist the family in bringing Israel Cappell's Memoir of Holocaust Survival to print. And a group of students who worked with me and with Janine over the course of a year to review the manuscript, edit it, prepare it for publication, and engage in all of the very detailed and fine-tuned aspects of historical research. And those wonderful students represented here are Maia Gelerter, Gillian Smith, Michaela Esposito, all of whom were L&D Leve Fellows of the Center and who traveled to Belgium, to Brussels, where Israel Cappell survived the war, to visit original archives, libraries, and wartime sites of import to his story, and also Anne Pei, who joined us in the capacity as the Stephen Lesser graduate student from China affiliated with the Leve Center for Jewish Studies over the course of the year in which she participated in this project. You'll be hearing from everybody in turn. We will do our best to stick to a tight schedule so everyone can speak, and yet you truly get a feel for the wonderful memoir whose publication we are here to celebrate. So with that, I turned it over to Janine Zacharia from Stanford University, my co-editor on this project, to offer some additional words of welcome.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and hello to the UCLA and the rest of the community that's taking the time to join us for discussing this wonderful book, With Many Miracles, A Memoir of Holocaust Survival in Belgium. This is the cover, this is what it looks like, and we are very proud that it is here in print. Here's Israel Cappell, if you can see him on the back there. Maybe he's flipped, but again, I want to echo Sarah and thank the Leve Center for their support in the publication of this memoir. And I'm thrilled that the students, Micaela, Maia, Gillian, and Anne, will have an opportunity to share their experiences of working on this memoir, given how essential their contributions were to its completion. You know, as someone teaching students at Stanford, I'm always looking for ways to empower the next generation to go off into the world and have impact. And I believe that the memoir's publication is a clear example of that. You know, as Sarah and I wrote in the introduction to the book, and I believe Sarah wrote this lovely line, actually, this manuscript has passed through many hands and its publication owes a debt to many parties. And, you know, Sarah covered a lot of that, but I think one of the things that gives me such extreme joy is that the breadth of the collaboration here. Israel Cappell composed this memoir by hand on yellow notebooks, and his daughter, Netty Gross Horowitz, in turn transcribed it and began the laborious edit over many years. She wrote to me in an email, and we included this too, an excerpt of the email in 2013. My father, who at the time, her father at 91, is very excited at the prospect of the memoir being published, but worried that he might not live to see the result. And unfortunately, that is true, but it gives me a lot of joy to know that it is done, and I'm hopeful somehow he knows it. When Netty, who was my dear friend from when I worked with her at the Jerusalem Report magazine in the 90s, when she died tragically in 2021 at only the age of 66, it was left incomplete. And I reached out to her brother, Ken, who I'm so glad we're going to hear from shortly. And we both I wanted to help Netty. I wanted to honor Netty, and I wanted to honor their father as well, who was at my wedding. And I love their mother as well, by helping to complete it. And Ken obviously also wanted to do this, and I think we had a spectacular partnership in bringing this about. I realized as I dug into it, though, that I would not be able to do this without expanding our team. And so I was very lucky that Sarah Stein, who I met perchance also in Jerusalem in 1994 when we were roommates, way back when, and is now the illustrious historian that she is, has published 10 books. Is that right, Sarah? 10 books. Who teaches Holocaust studies, is the perfect person to help. And so, we met with Ken and we talked about it, and Sarah said, let me bring in the students to help really with the fact checking, because we really wanted this to be of professional quality. And so with that, I want to pass it on to Ken, who can share a little bit more about the memoir and his father, and I believe is going to share a brief excerpt with us.
Thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this, Sarah, and the Leve Center, and all the other sponsors of this. It's an honor to be here and share with you. I'm sure some of my family is on. I haven't had a chance to scroll through the participants, but I'm sure they're here as well, and just as appreciative. I also feel, even though it's in the book and in the acknowledgments, but in Hebrew, there's an expression hakarat hatov, recognizing people for the good things they've done, and so I want to restate that again. And so thank you to Sarah, to the students. I have all their names: Micaela, Maia, Anne, and Gillian. Thank you for all your help and support. And thank you, Janine, for an unbelievable effort that went above and beyond the call of duty. I think, when I spoke to Janine after my sister passed away sometime in November or December. Well, I guess she passed away in November. It must have been December of 21. I consciously brought up the book that I felt this burden to finish, or to publish, really. And I was mentioning it to Janine. I figured she's in journalism. I'll get a few pointers. I did not expect her to say, I want to help you finish and publish this thing. And, as she said, she adored my sister. They were colleagues, they were friends. She said she knew my parents. And so I'm extremely appreciative for all the work that everyone has done. Obviously, there was Jason for the design cover, Elliot for the book layout, because I think if my father were alive today, he would look at this book and say, wow. And I think the wow is really about how his story is unchanged. The words are his, but all the editing and embellishments, cast of characters, maps, pictures, have truly enhanced the story. All the additional pieces that we've put in surrounding it, the introduction, the items in the back of the book as well. So I think it's an unbelievable product, and thank you all. I don't have a lot of time because I know Sarah's going to pull a cane out here and yank me off your screen, but there's a lot to say, but I will limit my remarks to just one observation I have about my father and this book. My father was always struck by people's behavior, both good and bad. He, and you could see this throughout the book. And this is true his whole life as it was, during the wartime periods. And, there are times when he singles out people for their kindness, such as a British medic who sees them on the road and helps an injured brother-in-law of my father at the time, Maurice, and he didn't have a sling. So the British medic ripped his shirt and turned it into a sling. And he writes how impressed he was about that, or the number of Belgians who were not Jewish, but yet who offered assistance and help and risked their lives to help them. He was very taken by them, as he was by the brutality of various Nazi commandants and guards. All these things made a big impression, and I think it's what was on his mind in the very last paragraph that he wrote at the end of the book, which I will just read. This is at the very last chapter, and the chapter is called Justice with a question mark. And he concludes, the 4-year Nazi occupation of Belgium was a tragedy for the Jews as well as for Belgian non-Jews. The Jews who did survive the slaughter owe their lives to their inner courage to disobey the Nazis and hide, as well as to the decent and humane Belgian non-Jews, like Pierre Carnaval, who helped them. Pierre, by the way, was a resistance fighter who was ultimately caught and executed. May the murderers and their helpers know no peace in this world and in the afterlife, and may the saviors be blessed for generations, as I was. You know who you are. And I think if my father was here today, where we're living in a world with, unfortunately, a rise and a spread of anti-Semitism, he would be disheartened, but he'd be looking for the Pierre Carnavals and the other good citizens to do the right thing. And I think, together with the fact that we have an existence of the state of Israel, which we didn't have in World War II, and that the good people will prevail over the evil ones.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you, Janine. I'm going to take the floor for about 5 minutes. And what I'd like to offer is a quick walkthrough of Israel Cappell's memoir and story with a very short commentary. I only have 5 minutes, and also offer, while so doing, a bit of a reflection on what it means to have the opportunity in a major, first-rate, globally renowned public university of large scale, to have the luxury and the privilege to work closely with students on an extended original research project. But that's a lot to do in 5 minutes, so I will do my best. All Holocaust memoirs are distinct, although most share commonalities, including certain key temporal historical touch points. Israel Cappell's memoir, I think, fits within this broad frame. Israel Cappell was born Israel Cappell, excuse me, Ken, correct me, Cappellinic, correct? No, you're muted.
Kapelushnik.
Kapelushnik. Apologies, I should have been more polished, but we
It
think of him as
doesn't
Israel
read. It
Cappell.
doesn't read Kapelushnik, but that's
We
the way
call it
it's
Kapelushnik.
pronounced.
Thank you. So born Kapelushnik in the city of Łódź in 1922 in Poland, an industrial city that whose diverse life his own family reflected, with one grandfather, an industrial entrepreneur, and another grandfather, a composer of nigunim and a Hasidic Rebbe of some renown. The family moved to Brussels in 1930, joining a wave of cross-European Jewish migration. And they joined the city that was culturally and religiously diverse, Flemish and French speaking, made up of secular individuals, of Catholics, of some Jews. Astonishingly, in this interwar period, more than half of all the Jews of Belgium live in the city of Brussels. And also 95% of them are not Belgian citizens. And this was true of Israel's own family, who moved carrying Polish passports. They are in the city when Belgium is conquered by Germany in May of 1940, put under the direct control of the German military administration. And Israel Cappell writes of the extraordinary attempt by the extended family to flee by foot to France, a very dramatic episode that unfolds early in the memoir and that ultimately proved a failure because they must return to Brussels, where they witness the imposition of race laws, of spoliation of Jewish property, of arrests and raids, and the beginning of deportations. And ultimately, there will be 25,500 Jews deported, 350 Roma and Sinti. Most will go, before they go to a camp, to the Mechelen internment camp on the outskirts of, within Belgium. 40 to 45% of the Belgian Jewish pre-war population will be killed by the Nazi genocide. Now, Israel Cappell's family does not follow the normal path, statistically speaking. They make a different choice, which affects the fate of all members of the family. And this has to do with an extraordinary historical happenstance, in a way, which is that Israel Cappell's brother Charles registers the family in the Palestine office in Brussels, the office because the young men of the family were Zionist inclined. And they carry these unusual passports of the Palestine office that will ultimately guarantee their freedom, a statistical anomaly, but a crucial historical episode that has been written about in a Jerusalem Post article by Netty Gross that we reproduce in the end papers of this book. Before, however, the family is saved by this paperwork, they go into hiding. And they proceed through the course of the remainder of the war to move through a series of residences in Brussels, many often living together, but sometimes living separately, until in a dramatic episode, their last place of hiding is raided and the family is almost in their entirety deported to the Mechelen internment camp. There are significant dramatic escapes that you can read about in Israel Cappell's own words and in the words of his sister Fanny. A brief selection of her words are also reproduced in this book. Israel Cappell's memoir then talks about life in this internment camp, talks about the unusual experience, the unprecedented experience of being spared from deportation at the very last moment because of the intercession of this legal quirk of the family's name existing on the Palestine list, which ultimately guarantees their unusual liberation. His story is, as far as we can recount, one of the rare English language memoirs about Jewish survival and hiding and Holocaust experiences in Belgium. For that reason, because of the family's Hasidic heritage, because of the unusual story of hiding and constant resituating of the family across the cities of Brussels, and finally, because of Israel Cappell's own tone, which I would say is thoughtful, sometimes humorous, rueful, ethical, sharp, this memoir, With Many Miracles, is a distinct source that I think we all hope will be used by students of the Holocaust and scholars of the Holocaust in time to come. Now, quickly, and I am timekeeper and I am remiss for not being certain if I have overrun my time. Very quickly, I want to say this about working with students. To bring a handwritten manuscript to print is not a simple process. Netty Gross engaged in an initial stage of transcription, which she did very painstakingly. And the students and I together engaged in the project of framing the story, explaining unclear moments in the story, explicating certain references. But more than this, these 4 students that you see before you became, I think it's fair to say, entirely immersed in Israel Cappell's life and in his story. And I would receive middle of the night texts from them expressing their complete thrill when they found someone, for example, Dagobert Meir, in the archive. And because of this discovery, because of their zeal, their erudition, their dedication, they were able to help me and Janine and Ken and the family flesh out a memoir such that it goes from handwritten, almost sometimes difficult to decipher form, into a book with commentary, with framing sources, with rich illustrations, and the book that I hope you will be able to have before you. So with that, and with my compliments to the students, I turn the floor to them to share now a bit of time and to speak both of the memoir and of their experience of research.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Stein. I think that really does sum up how important this project was for us. All of us are history students, of course, who were in slightly different stages of our education when we took on this project. And all of us are history students in such a serious way that I think we are all either considering careers in history or research, or at least fairly dedicated to pursuing graduate study, and of course is already doing that in history. So this project was incredibly meaningful for us to do that, and it's something that is a very rare opportunity from the student side. And we are very fortunate that Dr. Stein brought us on individually. We were all former students of hers that she asked to help her with this, and I think we'll all be able to speak to this, but we were all able to engage with this manuscript in really meaningful ways. I think that the term editor doesn't really capture what we did for this book. I think that it doesn't reflect our determination to preserve Israel's voice as exactly as possible. I would describe us more as caretakers of his story. We sought to make his manuscript accessible for readers like all of you. And so in terms of editing, mainly what we did, other than checking for typos, was standardizing names. So if someone's name was written one way in chapter 1, we wanted it to be written the same way for the rest of the book. And the way places were written and the way dates were written and formatting things like that. We really wanted his words and the way that he wrote them, because he had such a unique style. It was very beautiful. At times it was very poetic, and at other times it was very raw. We didn't want to change any of that language. So much of what we did, other than formatting, was sort of background research that was used partly as a basis for the introduction, but primarily for footnotes, which are throughout the work, that sort of add in context or just extra detail where it was necessary. And that's one of the things that we went to Belgium to obtain more of. This footnote information, we really like that we chose that format ultimately, because it meant that we didn't have to insert our own words as much as possible into the body of the text, but that readers who may have come across a term they weren't familiar with, some of them we weren't familiar with at first, could then refer to those footnotes as an explanation to be able to understand the context of Israel's story. So when we went to Belgium, that was some of the stuff we were looking for, was more of that footnote information, but we also, I would say most importantly, were seeking to obtain documents from Israel's life, particularly from his time in the Mechelen transit camp and his placement on the Palestinian Exchange List along with his family. And we also wanted to obtain photographs of the camp itself and also the safe houses that Israel and his family hid in. So I will turn our Belgium trip over to Maia to talk more about that.
So yeah, thank you, Gillian. I think what you said about editor not really being an appropriate term for a role in this project was absolutely correct, right? We were very lucky to be able to handle this family's story, and even luckier to then, be able to secure a research trip to Belgium after doing, extensive edits and editing for voice in the manuscript. And so Gillian, Micaela, and I were able to fly to Belgium last May for roughly a week with the goals that, Gillian mentioned. The first that I'll be discussing is conducting archival research at the Kazerne Dossin, which is the Mechelen transit camp. So we were able to visit the Kazerne Dossin Holocaust Memorial Museum, and we met with a fantastic researcher, Dr. Lawrence Schramm, and she welcomed us into the museum archive and assisted us with scouring all the documents for each family member and character that Israel references during his time in the camp. This also included officers and other prisoners, and it ended up being hundreds of documents that Dr. Schramm sent us home with. So we were very lucky in that regard. We were able to find material such as work orders from Israel's time in the camp, transport lists for his siblings and family, and actually the Palestinian Exchange List that saved their lives. And she helped us source that from the National Archive in Belgium. And furthermore, Dr. Schramm she recommended that we reach out to the Jewish Museum of Belgium, which was a very unexpected but helpful resource. And we were able to, from there, contact archivist Sophie Collette. Unfortunately, because it was so unexpected and just kind of a gem of a resource, we didn't get to meet with her physically, but she was able to provide us further documentation, such as the family's registration cards, which was another fantastic resource for us. And as Dr. Stein mentioned earlier, we were lucky to work on this project because of the lack of English publication detailing the Kazerne Dossin and stories like that of the Cappelluzniks. And we discussed that with Dr. Schramm as well. And this was just another factor in our excitement about being able to go to Belgium and help bring this memoir to publication and help amend that gap. And then after that, as Gillian mentioned, we also had our secondary goal of documenting all locations and safe houses of the family, which I will turn over to Micaela.
Thank you, Maia. Before I get into that second point about, our Belgium trip, I think one of the biggest reasons why we also engaged so deeply with the material was not only, we had read the text multiple times for, when we first started this project, we read it just to know what the content was, read it again with more of a critical lens to just kind of go through for grammatical errors and whatnot. But we spent like several months, and I think Professor Stein also touched on it. We, in the book at the beginning, there's a character list that we split up into family members and then other characters that Israel mentions of prominence. He had a very close friend with him who was in the Mechelen camp. And we just spent, as researchers, kind of just going down this rabbit hole of, trying to standardize how is this person's name spelled, trying to discover more information about that person, because a lot of what Israel had written about was very limited because it was only from what he knew about when he was in the Kazerne Dossin. So I think it was really, really meaningful for us as researchers to be able to answer some of the questions he had. Unfortunately, we weren't able to answer them during his lifetime, but being able to incorporate them into the book and bring more clarity to some of the fates of those characters was really important for us. And as Maia mentioned, our second goal that we had in mind when we went to Belgium was to document many of the locations that Israel had touched on in his memoir, notably the various homes that he and his family hid in while attempting to evade Nazi capture. Over the course of our trip of about a week, we walked around Brussels and just started taking photos of the 3 different homes that he hid in. And actually, at the first home, which is a 76 Rue Jourdan in Brussels, we had this really amazing experience where we were out in the middle of the street at night. We had just had dinner and we were walking around and we realized that, oh, the home is right down the street. Let's just go take a look at it. And we started taking photographs, and we ran into the woman who currently lived in that building. And at first she was really concerned as to why there were just 3 girls standing in the street taking pictures of her home. But then upon, further discussion, we explained Israel's story to her and how his entire family hid from the Holocaust in that apartment building for several months. And she just burst into tears because she was so touched to hear the history of her home and the importance of it and how it aided in saving the life of Israel's family. And this was particularly important to her because she's I think the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors as well. Her name was Florence. She gave us her information. We were texting her on WhatsApp. The next day, she took us out to dinner. And then that night, she also invited us into her home so we could stand in the same building that Israel had hidden all those years ago. And Maia, Gillian, and I were so deeply touched by our interaction with Florence and getting to see just how meaningful Israel's story was to someone who had been unaware of it before meeting us. And I can go without saying, it goes without saying for all of us that this trip was something that we will absolutely never forget. And the opportunity to see in person the very same locations that we had spent months reading about and researching in Israel's manuscript was invaluable. And of course, we knew how special Israel's story was to us and to the family, and we knew how lucky we were to be able to be trusted with it. But to be able to expose his story to other people who unknowingly were tied into it was such an amazing experience. And also to be able to really visit those key elements of his story and include many of those photographs in the book was also really important to us as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about the photographs. And next, I'm going to hand it over to Anne. She's going to read an excerpt from the book that we chose that we think really highlights just how necessary it is to preserve stories like Israel's.
Thank you, Micaela. So we would like to end our note by sharing an excerpt from the book in which Israel Cappell talks about the postcards from Poland treasured by his father as a part of the astonishing Cappell family archive. It reads, quote, "My father stashed the postcards in stored furniture in Brussels where we lived, a wise move because we were arrested in 1944. After the war, when it was evident the senders had perished, the postcards, still in the now-retrieved furniture, traveled to the United States, where they became for my parents a kind of paper tomb, the last word from their perished brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, and friends. Loss of family was clearly not the only thing my parents endured. Gone was a sense of belonging that had defined their lives. After the Holocaust, all that was left were fossils of their original lives. The postcards I imagine were a comfort. We deeply appreciate the chance to participate in this project to bring Cappell family memories and histories to light. We hope this memoir, passed through so many hands, as Professor Stein said, can provide a small comfort not only to the Cappell family, but also to many other Jewish families who were torn apart, suffered, and perished in the Holocaust, yet nonetheless kept resisting, reuniting, and remembering. Israel's humor, bravery, and resolve continue to live with his memoir. Gillian, Maia, Micaela, and I want to again thank the great mentorship from Professor Stein and Professor Zacharia, enormous support from the UCLA L&D Leve Center and Stanford Tobey Center for Jewish Studies, and last but not least, the Cappell family for preserving and sharing this wonderful memoir. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for your beautiful words. I want to tell those who are joining us on the webinar that you are welcome at this point to begin to populate the Q&A feature on Zoom and offer any comments or questions that you have, and I will try to address them to the group. But first, while I wait for those questions to appear, I might ask those present if they might be willing to the students to speak about the Kazerne Dossin site and museum, and Janine, the students, Ken, to reflect on that site of internment and perhaps how that the daily experience of internment emerges in Israel Cappell's memoir, but also in what fashion it exists in the city today.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question. In large part because when we went to the Kazerne Dossin in person, we were really struck by how unassuming of a building it is. It's not what you see in typical photographs of Holocaust camps, and it's not what you probably picture in your mind when you think about internment. So when you walk past that building, you wouldn't really have any idea of the lives and struggles of the people who passed through it. It was a former military barrack that was converted after the Nazis occupied Belgium into a camp that was primarily a transit camp. Israel and his family were concentrated there and served as slave labor there for a few months, but most of the Belgian Jews who were deported to Auschwitz passed through the Kazerne Dossin and were there temporarily. So I'll let my colleagues weigh in, of course, on their thoughts about that, but I just think that's one thing I wanted to highlight is how you wouldn't know walking into that building or walking past it, how many lives passed through that building and were sent on to destruction. And it was really interesting and moving for us to go in person and to be struck by how many layers there were to the Holocaust and how unique the Belgian experience is and how hard it would be as an outsider to picture that without reading Israel's story or looking at his pictures or experiencing it yourself.
I can kind
Thank
of
you so much. Please.
just add on to that. I think I agree completely with what Gillian said. When we were there, we were kind of shocked at how, I mean, we had seen photos of it, and it was really interesting going there because there's a photo of it in the book of the main courtyard where when they arrived, they had to unload all of their luggage. And this was the same courtyard that when they would line up to get onto the cattle cars that took them to Auschwitz. And just being in that courtyard, it had been turned into a sort of garden as a memorial. And there was a series of like apartment buildings like right nearby where people were actually living in. And I just remember talking to Gillian and Maia and just being like, it's kind of crazy that there are people who live here in a site where, you know, it kind of restructures our narrative and how we perceive the Holocaust as being, because Israel's story was so unique in the sense that, you know, the Micaela transit camp was not a place where people went to die, but it was their first stop before they were sent to Auschwitz. And I think, forgive me if I have the statistic wrong, but I think it was like 1 in 25 Belgian Jews survived. And, you know, of the 25,000 Belgian Jews who were sent through that camp and on to Auschwitz, only 1,000 of them survived. And Israel's family was part of that lucky 1,000. So to be in a place where so much suffering had occurred, and it was, you know, kind of that first stop before even more suffering, was really emotional to come into. And, you know, I think that the museum has done a really wonderful job honoring the history and its past, but it was definitely really difficult to come into. And it was a quite emotional day. It was our first day. We landed the night before, and then the next day we went, and yeah, it was just incredibly unassuming. It's, you know, you get off the bus and it's just right there. And yeah, I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to say on that. It was definitely quite a fascinating experience.
Thank you.
I think I just have one comment before we move to the next question. It'll be quick. Like Micaela said, there were apartments that we noticed, and we were really struck by this, and we talked to Dr. Sherm about it, and she mentioned that these were actually, I believe, descendants of Holocaust victims or survivors. They had a connection to the camp in some way. And I think that was really meaningful. I remember that because I think it really speaks to what Professor Stein said about the uniqueness of this family's story and like the myriad ways that, you know, the Holocaust has now, you know, dispersed, and that experience has, you know, trickled into the lives of descendants. So I just wanted to point that out, that there were descendants living in the Mechelen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Sarah, I just want to say one thing. I know that I see there's some questions in the queue, so I'm going to let you get to them. But I, with my wife Marcy, are hoping to visit there in May, the end of May. I was there 50 years ago, and I thought the students did a terrific job saying that it's a very unassuming thing. Just the one little footnote, I couldn't help but notice when I was there that the name of the street where Kazerne Dossin abuts is Jodenstrasse. And when I asked about that, I was told that name that was actually many, many years ago, nothing to do with the Holocaust or World War II, but pre that time, I don't know if it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago, that was the Jewish section of the town and in Mechelen, and that's why it was called Jodenstrasse, Jew Street.
Thank you so much. Janine, do you want to add? If you just unmute.
I wanted to say one of the things that I haven't been there yet. I hope Sarah and I are going to get to go, but one of the things that really was motivating for me, and you know, it was hard doing this project, right? It's hard to just the way it was described. There's a lot of work that went into it, but we were going to do it. It was never going to end, right? I kept saying to Sarah, almost there, right? And one of the things that kept me motivated, in addition, you know, to my love for this family, was seeing this book someday in the Kazerne Dossin bookshop. That, you know, knowing that there were so few English language testimonials and knowing how good it was, and it's not about the building, Sarah, but one of the things that I think people will look forward to reading or experiencing are the characters in this book. You know, I'm a journalist, so I think in terms of characters sometimes, and there are these people we don't have time to talk about, but Shalom Silberschatz, and we almost called the book Live for Me, so I'll leave that as a teaser for you, and Ferdekopf, Horsehead, and Dagobert Meir, who was, you know, when we found his picture and they gave us permission to use it, it was so exciting, you know, and Charles, his brother, and Charles's first wife, and I mean, it's just such a rich cast of characters. So I digress.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I also want to mention that one of the fascinating aspects of the memoir is that Israel Cappell himself is called a flitzer when he is put in the camp. That is to say, an escapee. As someone who hid, he was situated in this distinct category and branded with a red armband and deposited in the internment camp in a room with other flitzers. And it is in this context that he meets a man who is really influential to his life and to his sense of being during the war years. And that is Sholem Silberschatz, who he speaks of very powerfully through the memoir and at its end. I'm going to, since one of the questions in the chat was about this site of internment, I will ask for the website of the Kazerne Dossin Museum to be put into the chat for all participants to view if they wish. There are many historical images there and vivid descriptions of the place of this internment site in the context of Belgian Jewish Second World War history. Returning to our questions, Professor Rachel Smith asks, she appreciates the webinar, which she calls fantastic, and she says that she would be curious to hear from the students who seem to be so deeply grounded in the study of history. whether working on this project changed how they think about or study.
I would like to answer that real quick. Hi, Rachel. Little backstory. Rachel is actually the one who introduced me to Professor Stein and is actually the reason I took a class of hers when I was a freshman about 3 years ago. And her course and introducing me to Professor Stein is quite literally the reason that I got involved in wanting to learn more about Jewish history and Holocaust history in general. To answer your question, Rachel, I would say that working on this project really made me so much more engrossed in aspects of Holocaust history that have not really made its way towards the forefront of general historiography about this topic. In my education, going through high school and even till now, I had never ever learned anything about the Holocaust in Belgium. So much of this was so brand new to me. And to discover a story as enriching as Israel's really made me wonder, how many other stories are there out there that are like his that haven't been told yet? And, I'm still an undergraduate right now, but, I doing a project like this and getting to spend several months doing research like this, really cemented to me that this is something that I want to explore further. And I know that a lot of us, my colleagues are all like pursuing graduate paths, and that's really exciting. And I definitely am going to hop on the bandwagon, hopefully, and keep this research train going as long as I can. But yeah,
and I would just add, Micaela, that you have worked for the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust and
I did.
done original
I also was
research there as well.
Yes, I was very lucky that I was actually I started that archival internship at the Holocaust Museum, Los Angeles, at the exact same time that I started this project. So they kind of informed each other, which was really wonderful. And it was a really, really enriching experience to not only be able to work firsthand with, a story like Israel's, but then to, go to the Holocaust Museum twice a week and work with archival material as well.
Gillian.
I just wanted to add 2 specific details to this question. The first is that I think as students of history, especially at the undergraduate level, it's really rare to work with people who are still with us. It's really rare to work with individuals' stories, and it's really rare to get to work on a project like this where you feel you are personally making a difference, not only for the study of history as a whole by adding this important work to the dialogue, but also by preserving for the Cappell family the voice of a really, really fantastic and interesting individual. So I think that for all of us, that was the first time we'd been able to do anything like that had individual significance. And it was an incredibly meaningful project. It was one of the most meaningful we've ever worked on. And then another thing that I would add to that is we, again, as history students have to do a lot of writing. We have to do a lot of different kinds of research. And for me, I won't speak for everyone else, this was my first time having to do editing, any kind of historical editing, and thinking about those kinds of questions of how do we present things? How do we decide what spelling to use for a name when there's 4 different languages at play? And I'd never thought about those questions before. So in that sense, it was also intellectually a very stimulating and unique project.
Thank you so much. That actually helps us transition very neatly into a question by Shuli Hochstad. And Maia, I'm hoping perhaps your comment can be integrated as we integrate Shuli's question into the conversation. She wanted to hear examples of difficult editorial decisions. And so, Gillian, you offered one, but we would need at least another hour, I think, together to talk about this because we belabored many, many decisions. The students and I, over the course of our year working together, Janine as editors, Ken joining us as we copy edited and reviewed the manuscript. But I want to mention just one, which I think is very interesting, which is that there was one section of the memoir that offered a prehistory that was chronologically out of order. And we really fretted over this. if we were to move it, it would read more fluidly, but would it do an injustice to Israel Cappell's own voice? Was it better to ease the reader's narrative and to offer foundational context in the chronological moment that was appropriate, or was it better to respect the format that he employed? We ultimately decided in that case to move that section, but in many other instances, we chose to preserve his voice the way it was written, even sometimes resisting the urge to neaten up a grammar or a turn of phrase, so that it really and truly was Israel Cappell's memoir. And here I return to Gillian's beautiful phrase, which I think is so profound, that we really saw ourselves as caretakers of his story, rather more than editors. Would anyone else like to respond to that question of difficult editorial challenges? Maia, please.
I would love to address this a little bit in the character list. So I know that's not necessarily part of Israel's manuscript, but this also ties back to what Gillian was saying about being caretakers of the story. As we lose survivors and become more and more distant from this event and this history, it becomes more and more important for us to consider, people are losing access to such to being close to this. So I think while designing this character list, accessibility and reader clarity was really important to us, because I know Micaela and I even discussed for hours exactly what language we wanted to use if we wanted to define or give an outline of each person in the character list rather than just list their names. So I think that's an example of it. We really struggled on how much information to include in the character list for readability, and also that also extends to the footnotes. A lot of that was, we were concerned with accessibility and readership. So I think that was maybe the content around the manuscript and helping readers access it was also very important and difficult.
Thank you so much, Anne.
I just want to add briefly to the previous question and then integrate that to my answer to this question. I think coming from a literary studies perspective, I really appreciate this experience of working with historians and see how we kind of ground this story in a historical context while preserving the specificity of this particular story. I feel in terms of editorial choices, I'm very, very glad that we managed to preserve the traces of Netty's edition and then Israel Cappell's personal adding on to the footnotes. So we really just want to present the readers this layers of memories passing through hands, and then try to preserve the voices, and I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anne. And just to explicate for very quickly what Anne's referring to in the footnotes, there are some footnotes marked IC for Israel Cappell's own footnotes, some marked NG for Netty Gross's edition, and some marked editors for our own editorial edition. So we have these kind of layers of understanding and interpretation. Ken, Janine, do you want to add?
I think I was extremely appreciative of the fact that you all picked up on things, like Sarah, you pointed out the inconsistency with, sort of the prehistory in the wrong place. And I think and a lot of my back and forth was with Janine, who was, sort of working, both with you and with me. And I really appreciated the fact that you all kind of asked me, what do you think about this and that sort of thing. And I know even though you were very strict in trying not to change my father's words, there were times that, you asked me and I said it was okay just to fix something really minor, but would make it more clear. So, no, I very much appreciate that. I think that's what I said in my opening remarks. I think you all, took something that was, as I wrote also, a rough diamond, and you turned it into a sparkling gem. And I think that was very meaningful and very appreciative of those things, those efforts.
Just want to add one quick thing that, in addition to the memoir, there is a spectacular addendum by Ken about Israel and like sort of on his perspective, fleshing out who he was. So you have the opportunity to read this survival story when he was a much younger man and then really understand what he actually did with his life as a survivor. And in addition, the story of his wife, Ken's mother, and Netty and Michelle's mother, that Michelle, Ken and Netty's sister, contributes to the book as well, because she herself had an extraordinary survivor story. And so I feel that the contribution goes, as this has been said before, it really goes beyond just even his story alone. There's this multi-generational, multi-contributor perspective. And I loved how Anne pointed out that there are these layers of footnotes that we all preserved. And it's also just a beautiful book. I don't want to keep holding it up. I'm not trying to market it. Like, talking about difficult decisions, like what's going to make the color of the font and Ken and I, like, is that the right angle of the window? This is an allusion to one of the hiding places where Israel Cappell would read the book of Isaiah, and it sustained him through this difficult period. And so this is meant to reflect that attic. And so all of that together, I'm so happy and grateful, and I'm so grateful that we could share this all with everyone.
Thank you. Well, sadly, we have quickly come to the end of our hour together. And so I want to just take a moment first to apologize for any questions we haven't addressed, to thank Ken and your family for entrusting us with this project. Thank you, Janine, for the collaboration, and especially to thank the students for the profound experience, and Micaela, Gillian, Maia, of working with you, of seeing your passion in motion. Thanks to the Leve Center for supporting the students to go on a research trip. And what an astonishing thing, I would say. With Many Miracles is the title of Israel Cappell's book, and it refers to the many miracles that allowed him to survive. But it is also such a miracle to be a public educator working with such dynamic and passionate students who take the study of history and Holocaust history so very much to heart. So for those who have joined us online, thank you for your attendance, and a link to purchase the book and learn more about Kazerne Dossin can be found in the chat. Thank you all, and wishing you a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.